All right, we are in chapter 5, which is the integument. Integument is just the fancy name for skin, but I think as you start learning more about this system, you might think, yeah, this deserves a fancier name. We kind of take the skin for granted as just a covering of our body. And it is a covering, right? We talked in chapter 4 about the skin, about the integument as a cutaneous membrane, right? This barrier. And if you recall, the cutaneous membrane includes the epidermis. We know the epidermis of the skin is made out of a specific type of epithelium. And if you're thinking stratified squamous epithelium, you are correct, right? That's going to make the epidermis. And then we talked about the deeper layers being made of connective tissue. We get some areolar connective tissue in this papillary layer, and then dense irregular connective tissue in the reticular layer. We'll come back to that, right? But you should recognize epidermis and dermis as that epithelium and connective tissue. We'll also in this chapter talk about the hypodermis. Now, hypo meaning like lower, deeper in this case. This is the layer deep to the dermis. It's not technically part of the skin, right? Notice it's not part of the cutaneous membrane. But there's not really a better place to talk about it, right? It's not part of another system. And so we'll talk about the hypodermis while we're in this chapter as well. Now, along with being this cutaneous membrane, this barrier, we'll also look at a variety of the accessory structures that we find in the skin and talk about their roles in the body. So before we jump in, let's spend a little bit of time kind of thinking about the functions of the skin. Because again, I think a lot of times we take this for granted. Right? So the first one you see up here is protection. And absolutely the skin is this protective barrier to the body. But protection from what? There's actually quite a few different things, right? Maybe you're thinking of some examples, right? Definitely from some trauma, right? So if you go flying off your bike or crash on your skis, when you make impact with the ground, your skin, the way it's attached through that hypodermal layer, actually kind of rolls. It deflects some of those impacts so that that doesn't go to deeper layers of the body. You're also getting protected from water and other chemical substances coming into the body, right? The skin is relatively waterproof. And that actually works in both ways. So it prevents water and chemicals from being absorbed through the skin, most. And then it also prevents water from leaving the body, right? It's protecting you from dehydration as well. So I'll put both absorption, right? It's protecting you from absorbing, but it's also protecting you from dehydration, losing water. Skin is protecting you from microbes, right? Think about that stratified squamous epithelium. You have so many layers of cells, it's really difficult for microbes to get in. And when they do, you actually have specialized systems to get rid of them. We'll talk about that. And the skin also serves as a protection against UV radiation, right? We've probably mostly heard that UV radiation can cause skin cancer, but the skin has layers that are actually trying to protect you from that as well. Okay, so maybe that's like number one. These are listed up here, but I figured they're kind of small. So our second one, storage of lipids. One of the functions is the storage of lipids. Again, most of the lipids are actually in that hypodermis, so not technically the skin, but an important function here, right? Remember, adipose is where we store triglycerides, and triglycerides are the way we store energy. So this is a really important, these body fat reserves are very important for energy, But by having it as that lower, that deepest layer just below the skin, it also is helping protect us. It helps to insulate us temperature-wise as well. So the storage, that doesn't say lipids, does it? The storage of lipids is an important function. We also, as I mentioned with the microbes, we have this ability to basically coordinate the immune system. Coordinate the immune system response to microbes that we find in the skin. So we'll see some specialized cells that are kind of this like frontline defense where if something does get into the skin, we can tell the rest of the immune system, hey, this bad guy is trying to get in. Okay. The skin is also super important as a sensory organ, right? So we have all sorts of different receptors that we'll talk about in the skin. And so it's not just that you get this sensation of touch, right? But we can sense pressure, we can sense temperature, we can sense pain, right? And that's all coming through here in the skin. We also, the skin is able to produce vitamin D, or at least start the production of vitamin D. We'll look at this process. But it's kind of interesting, right? If you think about it, it's like, well, we were just talking in connective tissue about how you have to eat oranges, right, to have enough vitamin C to properly make collagen. But we don't have to eat something. We just have to get some sunshine, right? And our skin can start this process of vitamin D production. Okay? The skin also is able to help us excrete toxins. Sorry, I don't know where this is best. Maybe you just open your book and you look at this picture. So excretion, right? We've all noticed that before. Maybe if you eat a lot of garlic, you can smell it coming out in your sweat, or some other toxins might be secreted that way as well. And then finally, thermoregulation. The regulation of body temperature. And this is a variety of things, right? We talked about the lipids in the hypodermis acting as insulation. We'll also see that we can constrict or dilate blood vessels in the dermis to bring blood flow to the skin if we're trying to dump heat, or we can constrict them if we're trying to kind of secure that warmth in the core. And then also we'll talk about our sweat glands, right, where you can actually put that sweat on the surface of your skin and get evaporative cooling. So there's lots of different ways actually the skin is involved in the regulation of body temperature. Okay? So then, right, see already you're going, wow, I had no idea that the integument did so many different things, and that's why it has a fancy name, right? This really is an overlooked organ, right? And keep that in mind too, right? The integument is your largest organ. If you took it off and laid it on the ground, which would be gross, right? It's something like 2 meters square. So that's like 6 feet. That's further than I can reach, right? By 6 feet. Lay that out on the ground, right? It makes up something like 15% of your body weight. You don't have to memorize these numbers, but just trying to remind you that this really is an important organ, and we're going to dive in and look at it some more.